Today's episode is brought to you by FreedomProject Academy. Looking for a K-12 classical online school built on Judeo-Christian values? FPA is enrolling now for the fall. Request your free information packet at freedomforschool.com. That's freedom, F-O-R, school.com.
It's time to get educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we get started, please hit that share button so we can educate more patriots around the country. Today, we kick things off with our international correspondent, Alex Newman. Alex, you are a rising superstar. We love working with you. Thanks for being with us today. You look better in a beard than I do, so hey, it's a win-win-win for you. But I do want to introduce our first story, which is Pizza Hut, and yet another corporate sponsor pushing little children into reading books that have all kinds of radical left-wing transgender ideology. Talk about the story, please.
Well, thank you, Duke. And I think it's a sign of the times. In fact, I don't know of any society in all of human history that has descended into these kinds of depths of depravity. So you have now the government education system, the Fortune 500 companies, and the federal government itself now trying to push this on families, trying to push this on children. Frankly, it's beyond disgusting, but it's what we've come to expect from the big woke corporations that are having the wokeness agenda pushed on them by companies like BlackRock and by the government and by these new regulations that the federal government is developing on environmental, social, and governance issues. So this is really, really troubling. I think it's going to cost them financially big time, but it shows you just the depths of depravity that we have sunk to as a society.
We have some video, some slides to show. Take a look at some of the materials that are being sent. The description, product description. In the spirit of Julian is a Mermaid, a transgender book for kids, this irrepressible picture book celebrates drag kids' individuality and, whoa. Explain to me, Alex, I got a question. It's always bothered me. Individuality, right? How is it individuality if everybody who is male dresses like a woman, dresses in scandalously shocking clothes, who does the same stupid sexualized dancing? How do you get individuality from the collective nature of drag queen shows?
It's just another one of the lies that they use to promote this, that you get to be an individual. You get to be unique and special if you choose a new gender for yourself, if you dress up as the opposite sex. It reminds me of what they do to convince kids that they might be transgender or homosexual, too. They've developed this incredible psychological manipulation where they tell these kids that you're part of the oppressor class if you are heterosexual, if you are cisgender, if your skin doesn't have enough melanin, but hey, you can be a victim if you just identify as a new made-up gender, or if you just are a boy and come to school wearing a dress, or if you just announce that you're a homosexual attracted to the same sex. It's very manipulative, and what they're doing here to kids is deliberately pushing them into this, right? I was a kid in the 1990s, and this stuff was unheard of, Duke. I never met a kid who had been confused about their gender, who had been subjected to these crazy ideas, and so it wasn't a thing. And yet now it is completely and totally ubiquitous. It's because they're pushing it on these children.
Well, this is part of Pizza Hut's Kid Club, right? They've got a club for children, and you can see the different titles here, right? Be Amazing, the many meanings of Myelon, and then it's just unbelievable to me that they're targeting to these kids. And part of the problem that I have about this is this is all cynically corporately directed. They've decided almost exclusively because of Twitter, that this is a much bigger thing than it is. This is a much broader phenomenon in world culture than they really think it is. And so they're trying to get the trend, and so they want to be seen as woke. And in many respects, the problem, Alex, is the vast majority of moms and dads who, if they stood up and vocalized what they believed, they not only would Pizza Hut have to drop what they had done, they'd have to go back the other way, just like we're seeing with State Farm, right? State Farm, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. You get these soulful black female singers, right? Like a good neighbor, State Farm, as all these creepy commercials about how we're plugged into your family, we want to protect your house. Oh, and by the way, here's when you're not looking, a whole shelf of transgender books for your 5-year-olds.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that's happening in libraries. It's the same thing that is happening at Disney, right? Disney found out the hard way the consequences of this kind of abomination. But it's become so ubiquitous, and I think you're right too. A big part of it is due to the false impression of reality created by rigged algorithms at social media giants like Twitter, fake news reporting by the media giants. If you go out and actually talk to regular people in your community, there are very few people who support this. I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, but this is even happening at the school level. My story for this week at Freedom Project deals with exactly this sexualization of children, this effort to encourage children to get involved in queerness and transgenderism and drag queens and all the rest of it. It really is disgusting, Duke. And I think a lot of these companies are going to find out the hard way that this was a very, very poor decision.
And I think it's all the other absolute reality about this is when you scratch the surface of this transgender engineering, the real culprit isn't even necessarily America, it's Christianity. This is an attack on Judeo-Christian values. There is no doubt about this. This is attack on traditional religion, the Judeo-Christian values of American culture. If the progressives can uproot that entire spine, that's the entire spine of Western culture. If you can rip the spine out of Western culture, guess what? There's nothing else that's going to be able to stand. Let me ask you this question at the end of our minute here. How many 7-year-olds, if you ask them, would you like Halloween every day of the year? How many kids would say no? None, right?
Right. Free candy.
If you tell little kids, right, that by dressing up like in a Halloween costume every day, it's Halloween every day. This is what they're doing. They're convincing very vulnerable kids that everything now is make-believe. Everything is Christmas Eve. Everything is Halloween. And that's what they're doing to our children. This has nothing to do with these kids having epiphanies that their gender doesn't match what's in their pants. It makes no sense.
That's exactly right, Duke. And frankly, I think this needs to stop, and these people need to be held accountable. Any previous generation in our history would have recognized this as abuse of children, and we need to get back to that understanding.
All right, we're going to take a break in this segment. We're going to do a second segment with Alex on a similar story right after the break.
With all the censorship taking place on social media platforms, we've made it easy to keep up with your favorite content. Simply download the Freedom Project Media app in your app store. Get access to 18 new videos a week, plus thousands of archived shows, lecture series, and educational animations. Download the Freedom Project Media app on your Apple TV, Roku, tablet, or phone, and make sure you allow for notifications to keep you informed.
Back with Alex Newman. Alex, thanks for being with us again. So on top of what we just got done looking at, what corporations are doing, places like Pizza Hut, how about what's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, just down the road from me, where we have a queer group seeking children to perform in a drag show. See, it's not enough now. Notice the development. Used to kids were dragged to these things. Now they have to, then they were participating by slipping dollar bills to the dancers in adult bars. Now the kids themselves have to be the drag queens.
Yeah. It is so grotesque, Duke. It's a symptom of a totally depraved society. And believe it or not, this is happening in schools, too. In fact, that's what my latest article was about at the Freedom Project, my weekly education piece. They are literally recruiting children to perform in drag. And, I mean, everybody who's ever looked at drag knows that this has very sexual overtones, and it's not even concealed, right? It's in your face that this is the sexualization of children. This is predatory. It's grooming. It's all of the horrific things that a civilized society would never tolerate, especially directed at children. And yet here it is in your face in communities all over the country, including in states like Wisconsin and including on the left coast.
Let's take a look at the actual slide from Facebook. Are you a LGBTQ artist/entertainer under the age of 18? Do you want a chance to perform on a stage? Well, here it is, folks. Kenosha Pride is holding a youth-staged event on July 10th at Kenosha Pride. We want to give you the time to shine. If you or your children has an interest, you can direct message me on Facebook, and there you go. There are some of the underage children that are participating in this kind of nonsense. It is absolutely self-indulgent tripe. It's worse. I mean, this is worse than blackface was. to me than over the last 150 years. I mean, this is we hear from the left all the time about cultural appropriation. Nowhere do we talk about how young boys are being encouraged to actually appropriate femality. You know, go back to what Matt Walsh had said. What is a woman? His what powerful documentary. This is the question. You're erasing women with this garbage, and the feminists themselves seem to be completely absent.
Yeah, it's so grotesque, Duke, and I think there's several things going on here. You and I have been sounding the alarm for years about how one of the end goals of this movement was the normalization of pedophilia, and that's exactly what this is directed toward. This is turning children into sexual objects for the gratification of adults. It is so sick, it is so reprehensible that, again, I think a civilized society would prosecute things like this. And then there's another element, too, and you hit the nail on the head with the feminization of men and boys, right? The establishment, the totalitarians that are working to undermine our society, that are working to undermine our system of constitutional Republican government, they recognize that masculine men are who love their families, who love their liberty, who love their country, who aren't dependent on the government, are the primary obstacle to their takeover. Men have always been valiant, brave, courageous men have always been the ones who have fought battles for freedom, including in our history, right? Our nation was founded by manly, valiant men with incredible courage, with backbones of steel. And so they think that by feminizing all the little boys, by brainwashing all the little boys, by telling them that it's wonderful and glorious and amazing to dress up as grotesque caricatures of women. I mean, this is all very carefully calculated, and we need to be clear about that. There are very evil agendas at work here.
Gets even worse, Alex. Dallas, Texas. We had a child-friendly drag show at Dallas Gay Bar, which prompts state lawmakers to actually look at banning this kind of stuff. You will not believe the video I'm about to show you. I'm going to also point out that it's important that you see. They talk about the left, that this has nothing to do with sex. Then why is there a neon sign right behind the dancing kids that says, and I quote, "It's not going to lick itself"? Take a look. You know, if you went to a bar to see little kids do that, actual little girls doing that, you'd be embarrassed. You'd be embarrassed for the little girls. It's inappropriate. You'd be embarrassed that they were at a bar doing it. It seems all out of place unless it's little boys pretending to be girls, and then all of a sudden this is just great fun.
I mean, this is now ubiquitous, and it's happening backed by taxpayers. It's happening in public schools. It's happening in public libraries. It's happening in the big corporations. And parents, if you don't protect your children from this, nobody's going to do it for you. The very same government that you would think would normally be in charge of protecting children from something like this is participating and promoting this madness. So, folks, it's up to you.
I think it's really interesting that they start at age 0, which tells you all you need to know. Whenever you're starting to go after kids at age 0, you know you're dealing with ideology. And one last thing I'll throw at you. If every single mom and dad who watched Top Gun 2 and reveled in masculinity and American patriotism, if every one of those moms and dads fought this issue, would be over tomorrow. Alex, thank you so much for your time today. And hey, excited, we're going to see you again tomorrow to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Today's show is sponsored by our friends at MyPillow. Save up to 66% on all items at MyPillow.com when you use the code Dr. Duke. That's DRDUKE. Support this show by supporting a great American company.
White, straight Christian men who love their country are the new scapegoat, as enemies of the one true God have stepped up their game. How? By associating Christians and conservatives in America with cultural chaos, division, evil, and anything that's currently frowned upon in a woke society. We are the problem, and the media has received its talking points from the Joe Biden Democrats. One example quick, over on the leftist View recently, the worldly women engaged in a one-sided, of course, conversation demonizing God, guns, and Christian nationalism. What do they mean? Well, this ignited a debate that's too important not to address here. I'm David Fiorazo, and this is Christ and Culture. The war of words has recently progressed to alarming levels, but this latest modern method of warfare is actually dangerous and irresponsible. Sadly, we've come to expect that from the lefties in power and also from the ladies on The View. Now, I've never heard of her before, but guest host Tara Setmayer opined about what's behind recent domestic terrorism and violence in the country. Watch this.
It's part of the Christian nationalism, this rise in violent Christian nationalism that we have seen, which is also disturbing because they find it to be, they use biblical principles, they pervert them to justify this, which is another problem, particularly in Texas. This is a growing movement. It's God, guns, and Trump, or God, guns, or whatever. It's part of their ethos.
They? Who's they? Us? And what's wrong with biblical principles and the morality that the Bible teaches, what we strive to live by in our culture? Now, I'm not justifying what hypocrites do and those who use religion for violence. I don't even think they're Christians, by the way. But notice how she lumps these groups, religious people, supporters of the Second Amendment, conservatives, maybe some independents, and of course Republicans, all together and labels it Christian nationalism. We'll get to that in a minute. Whoopi Goldberg, of course, had to chime in and declared that racist white Christians historically used the Bible to justify mistreating black Americans, especially down south. Now, she said it's always been this way. Really? In her words, watch.
They used to use the Bible and say, you know, you're not people, so God doesn't see you as people, so we don't see you as people.
So Whoopi also said she's sick of this, meaning of kids being shot in schools. Now, 19 children died in the Texas shooting that they were referring to, and yet every weekend in major cities across the country, hundreds are shot, dozens die. Do you hear that in the news? These cities have some of the strictest gun laws on the books. Let's take Chicago, for example, just one. 2 weeks ago, 51 people shot over Memorial Day weekend, the most violent in 5 years. Did that make national news? No. Why not? But what is making news? These accusations from the left about Christian nationalism. Those two words put together are most often used as a derogatory term or terms. We now know from experience that unjustified accusations and labels can be unfairly used to target a certain group and issue marching orders, often triggering an emotional response. Since we have really no idea how Christian nationalism is defined, except maybe those who oppose Democrat socialists, I don't know, let's first define what nationalism means. According to Got Questions, nationalism is a sense of loyalty and commitment to a person's country. It includes belief that the country ought to self-govern, pursue self-interest, meaning what's best for that nation, and encourage shared cultural attributes. Appreciation for one's culture, language, traditions, music, history, or achievements is a good thing. It's a fine thing. The same holds true for efforts to sustain those legacies. Now, the American left has a problem with those who hold a biblical worldview. That's an understatement. For example, Time magazine recently published a story with this headline: "It's time to stop giving Christianity a pass on white supremacy and violence." Now, Christian white supremacy, that's what we're talking about now. I think I get it. Are you following along here? The essence of their rhetoric is that straight white American men are at the root of the violence and societal distress we're experiencing as a nation. Remember, the use of language to demonize the opposition, what have we said over and over and over? That, my friend, is communist policy. Accusations of Christian nationalism, hate, homophobia, intolerance, bigotry, racism, sexism, and violence are coming at us from every angle. Now, this, of course, part of the progressive propaganda campaign to marginalize and discredit believers in Christ, or conservatives. Now, these labels are used as weapons, and the strategy here is nothing new. An example you may not have heard about. In 1943, here's part of a directive from Communist Party headquarters to their followers here in the USA. Quote, when certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable buildups as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind. So what are we talking about? Guilt by association and how they're framing it. Now, to the left, true believers in Christ, we are the irritating obstacles, their words, right? Remember how the Democrat left used what happened at the U.S. Capitol last year to label all Trump supporters and those who disagree with Joe Biden as extremists and domestic terrorists because we love freedom? Report after report declared the January 6, 2021 insurrection was the same as Pearl Harbor or the 9/11 terrorist attacks on America. Hopefully you remember this. Media outlets were given marching orders to frame the rest of us a certain way. And they used the exact same language, proving they thought this through. Watch this clip to refresh your memory.
You're not a Nazi or a white supremacist. Why are they calling you that? Why are they denouncing you as a seditionist, an enemy of the state? Why are they demanding that government censor and disarm you? Because they think you're a terrorist. They deployed thousands of National Guard troops to your capital and kept them there for months. What? Against Americans? We weren't being invaded. Those were Trump voters they claimed to be afraid of. They began using language that even the most radical Democrat in Congress just 6 years ago would have thought was way too extreme. And it wasn't just a few of them who did this. Virtually all of them did it.
Certain dates echo throughout history. December 7th, 1941. September 11th, 2001. And January 6th, 2021.
Similar to Pearl Harbor and 9/11.
We can now add January 6th, 2021 to that very short list of dates in American history that will live forever in infamy.
The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
And this was the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
The worst single act of political violence since the Civil War.
The worst attack on American democracy, arguably, probably since the Civil War.
Now, the D.C. Capitol building, remember, it was fenced in, National Guard posted for months. So the question, was that just a sideshow? A smokescreen for what else they were doing? Because if it wasn't, then they were supposedly protecting the country from you. If you're a Christian, a Trump voter, supporter, Republican, conservative, do you get it now? You're starting to follow along? Just because there were some flags, banners, or Christian symbols present at the Capitol, people were marching for freedom and fair elections and protesting. I thought the left didn't mind peaceful protests. Well, you can define peaceful. But just because those symbols were present doesn't mean that the left can put everyone in one big basket of deplorables, right? But that's exactly what they seem to be doing. Keep an eye out for this. The uber-liberal Associated Press published a recent article saying this: Christian nationalism is on the rise in some GOP campaigns. Their aim was to discredit and attack Republicans who recently won primaries. Doug Mastriano, who calls the separation of church and state a myth, which it is, second biggest lie in America, by the way. He's also referred to the Bible in speeches. He won Pennsylvania's Republican gubernatorial primary just last month. Also, Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene talks about being a watchman on the wall against those seeking to destroy our faith. She easily won her primary. What's wrong with that? These are free elections, I thought. Well, the article concludes with a statement explaining that Christian nationalism is the, quote, gasping, dying breath of the older generation in America that is afraid that Christians are going to be replaced, end quote. This is the AP. Now, they won't admit that there's really persecution amping up here in America. There has been, in fact, an agenda to eradicate God and the Bible, biblical Christianity, from the public square. Look at our schools. Look at Hollywood. Look at our government. That's called denial when they're not admitting this. A caution to us, however, is to not be in denial ourselves about what's going on and to recognize the spiritual warfare and the battles being waged all around us. What can we do? Read your Bible. After praying, believing, speaking up, holding the line, working, and after having done everything, stand. God bless you and keep speaking the truth about things that matter.
And that's going to do it for this show. I'm Dr. Duke. Until next time, hey, you stay educated. We do it better than anybody. And you're still our friends.